Millions of Americans could receive the most snowfall that they've received in years. Because right now, there are major weather pattern changes going on throughout the world, which would make it more likely in some areas we'll see much more colder and snowier than average conditions, while in other areas, it would be warmer and drier than normal. And one of those pattern changes is the emergence of an enso-neutral pattern, which typically brings colder and snowier conditions to the north while warmer and drier conditions to the southwest. When comparing the average temperature as well as the average precipitation accumulation for enso-neutral years compared to the long-term average, we see a clear indication that it's colder than normal in the northern United States, which makes it more likely you're going to see more snowfall accumulation this winter. While when it comes to precipitation, it's typically drier than normal right around the southwest and a little bit more moist than normal in the southeast, so there is a higher possibility potentially for higher accumulation of snowfall in the southeast with more precipitation and storm systems moving through. However, we also need to take a look at another pattern that could potentially point towards a snowier winter in the northern United States and in other areas as well. And that's in regards to the increasing amount of snow cover we're seeing over Siberia right now, as numerous studies have indicated in the past that a higher amount of snow cover right over Siberia typically leads to more snowstorms moving through the United States. This is due to the fact that an increased amount of snow cover over Siberia typically leads to higher pressure over the area, which disrupts the polar vortex and weakens it to the point where all that polar air that's trapped due to a polar vortex would be able to move further southward during a weaker polar vortex, similarly to how a pothole would disrupt a tire, where a pothole would pop the tire and release all that air out of the tire, with the tire being the polar vortex in this scenario and the pothole being the higher air pressure over Siberia. So when taking a look at the current snow cover extent compared to average for the Siberian region during the late portion of September into early October, we're clearly seeing more snowfall than usual over Siberia right now, which does make it more likely we're going to be in for a weaker polar vortex this winter, thus making it more likely we're going to be in for an active winter when it comes to snowstorms as well as Arctic blasts moving through the United States. And there are other factors as well we need to take a look at when determining what type of winter we'll see for the United States, such as the quasi-biennial oscillation, or the QBO pattern for short, which is a stream of winds between 10 to 30 miles above the equator that typically varies in wind direction every 30 months or so from an easterly phase to a westerly phase, and depending on which phase we're in, that could have big implications on what we'll see during the winter of 2025 and 2026. Currently, we're in an easterly QBO phase, which raises a possibility of sun stratospheric warmings happening in the polar regions, which in turn will make it more likely we're going to see weaker polar vortexes this winter, which will allow for a higher likelihood of snowstorms moving into the United States. So based on these patterns alone, it's safe to assume that many areas in the United States are going to see more snowfall than what you typically see in any given winter, as you're going to see in this snowfall forecast map that I'm going to show you guys right now. So here's the total snowfall forecast for the winter of 2025 and 2026 for the entirety of the United States, as we're going to be taking a look at each specific region of the United States to give you guys the best forecast possible for your specific area. First, starting with the Northeast. Taking a look at the Northeast, more specifically the 80-inch range we'll start at. This isn't a very populated areas, but it still includes big cities such as Buffalo, Burlington, as well as Rochester, New York. This is where you should expect over 80 inches of snow. Now, for some areas, that's around what you typically see in any given winter time, especially right around the Adirondacks of upstate New York. But in other areas, this is more than what you typically experience, so you should be prepared to shovel a little bit more this winter and for much colder air. Now, for the 60 to 80-inch range, this includes cities such as Binghamton, Albany, as well as Portland, Maine. This is right around average, or slightly above average to what you typically see during the winter time frame, so definitely be prepared for that in those areas. And the 60 to 80-inch range is a little bit further southward this winter, so in the areas further southward, you should expect a little bit more snowfall as well, potentially closer to 60 inches rather than potentially 50 or 40 in your specific location. For the 40 to 60-inch range, this is where we begin to see the snowfall affect the more populated areas in New England, such as Boston, Providence, as well as Hartford. You should expect 40 to 60 inches, which is around average or slightly above average in some of these areas, as I'd expect to be in the higher end for a city like Boston, where you typically experience snowfall on average around the low 40s. This year, I'm expecting closer to 60 inches of snow right around Boston. And for Connecticut, 40 to 60 inches is above average for most areas, where your average is more so around 30 inches or so. The 30 to 40 inch range is also very interesting because it includes cities such as New York City. It includes the central portion and northern portions of New Jersey, as well as the metro portions of Philadelphia. So this is more than what those areas typically experience, which is more so around 25 inches of snowfall in a given season. So definitely be prepared for that this winter, for more snowstorms more likely in those areas. South of that, we have the 20 to 30 inch range, which includes cities such as Washington, D.C., Baltimore, as well as Wilmington, Delaware, which is above average for some of these areas such as Washington, D.C., where you typically experience closer to 15 inches of snowfall per year. And it's the same goes for southern New Jersey, as well as the northern portions of Delaware and Maryland. Now, moving on to the Midwest, starting with the areas expected to receive over 80 inches of snowfall this winter, it's mainly relegated to the higher elevations of the Rocky Mountain range. But we also do see some bigger cities get involved with potentially over 80 inches of snowfall, such as Green Bay, Wisconsin, as well as the Grand Rapids area of Michigan. So this is above average for some of those areas, so definitely keep that in mind going into the winter timeframe, as we're expected to see more snowstorms move through the northern Midwest this winter. So for the darker shaded purple areas, this includes cities such as Minneapolis and Denver. That's where you should expect 60 to 80 inches of snowfall this year, which is well above the average for both cities, where you typically in any given winter time frame experience more like 45 inches. I'm expecting this due to the fact that we're going to be in a neutral phase, which typically does bring more jet stream dips to the northern Midwest, so you definitely need to be prepared for many more snowstorms and Arctic blasts moving through those areas. So now for the cities expected to receive 40 to 60 inches of snowfall. This includes cities such as Fargo, Des Moines, Milwaukee, Cleveland, as well as Detroit. In many of these areas, this is more snowfall than you typically experience in any given winter time frame. For example, in places like Des Moines and Detroit, you typically experience snowfall in any given winter right around the 30-inch range. You're expected to receive 40 to 60 inches of snow this winter, and for Milwaukee, it should be on the higher end of that spectrum. For the 30 to 40-inch range, this includes cities such as Omaha as well as Chicago, as this is higher than usual for Omaha, while right around Chicago, it's sort of close to the average, but I wouldn't be surprised if Chicago gets above average snowfall, thanks to the fact that we're going to see a colder winter for much of the northern Midwest, so definitely be prepared for that right around Chicago and surrounding areas. For cities such as Kansas City, Indianapolis, as well as Columbus, Ohio, you should expect 20 to 30 inches of snowfall, which for many of the surrounding areas, including some of the cities, that is above average snowfall from what you typically expect in any given winter time frame. Just to the south of that, we have the 10 to 20 inch snowfall range, which includes cities such as St. Louis, Louisville, as well as Cincinnati, which definitely is right around average for those cities. However, I do expect that there will be that higher possibility of potentially more snowstorms with a weaker polar vortex in those areas. Now, shifting our focus to the southeast, where it's nearly exclusively the 1 to 10 inch range, which includes cities such as Dallas, Oklahoma City, Memphis, Nashville, as well as Charlotte, North Carolina, and Atlanta. We do see that this is around average for many of these areas. It is a bit more difficult for the jet stream dips to dip as far southward during a neutral phase for the southeast. However, you should expect around average snowfall, and there is that higher possibility that it could be above average thanks to a weaker polar vortex that's expected this winter. And I'm sure you guys in the deeper south, such as in cities like Houston, New Orleans, or even Jacksonville, Florida, are wondering if you will see another possibility of snowfall this year, just like what you saw last year, where you saw a record-breaking snowstorm move through. Well, I will say the chance is still higher than any other year when it comes to winter time frame. However, on average, of course, it's unlikely you're gonna see accumulating snowfall, so I wouldn't hold your breath on it, but the chance is still there, and it's higher than any other winter, I'd say. And last but not least, we have the west coast of the United States, which includes cities such as Seattle and Portland, where it's expected to be drier than normal for much of the western United States this season, which is expected during Enso neutral patterns. So for a place like Seattle and Portland, you should expect less than 10 inches of snow this season. And in the higher elevations of California and just the west coast in general, it should be less snowfall than usual. For a place like the Sierra Mountains of California, where you typically receive over 80 inches of snowfall on average, I'm expecting a little bit less than that, closer to 60 to 80 inches of snowfall, as it's expected to be just drier than normal. Less storm systems are going to move through the west coast, so definitely be prepared for that in those areas. As for places such as Salt Lake City, Albuquerque, as well as much of Arizona, the snowfall should be below average for those areas as well, where right around Salt Lake City, the snowfall should hover around the 40-inch range, which is below your average of around 50 to 60 inches per year, so definitely keep that in mind going into the winter. So to summarize, we're expecting to see a much colder and snowier than average winter for much of the northern United States, thanks to the fact that we're seeing a higher amount of snow cover extent right over Siberia, which will eventually lead to weaker polar vortexes this winter. The fact that we're also in an Enso neutral pattern typically does bring cooler than average temperatures as well, and due to the fact that we're also in a easterly QBO pattern, which also does enhance the possibility of weaker polar vortexes moving through. However, for the southwestern portion of the United States, it likely will be warmer and drier than normal thanks to an Enso neutral pattern. But that's my general total snowfall accumulation forecast for the entirety of the United States. If you want even more in detail forecast for your specific location regarding how much snowfall accumulation you should see for the entirety of the winter, just make sure to comment down below your location, and I'll make sure to give you guys an in detail forecast on what you should expect this winter and exactly how much snowfall accumulation your specific city or area should expect. So make sure to comment down below if you're interested. But that's it for now, guys. I thank you guys for watching. Make sure to subscribe if you want to see more winter season forecasts like this. Make sure to share this video with anyone who's interested when it comes to what type of winter you're going to see. And I hope you guys all have a great day.